Good afternoon, Tom. It's a pleasure to be interviewing you again. Tom, many questions come in from your readers. One of them is, will there be a major shift in consciousness soon? Many people are feeling that things are shifting. Is there a big paradigm shift coming?
Yeah, I hear that question a lot. I've been asked that in the questions and answer sessions at many of my workshops. People say, I kind of feel something in the air. It's like, we're in a very special time here, a very electric time that big things are going to happen. Big changes are in the near future, and so on. I hear that an awful lot. And I was thinking about it a few days ago, and it occurred to me that this is a very special time for a couple of reasons. Now, we have grown as a culture, we've grown as a people, as a race, humans, over the years. Things are quite different now than they were 10,000 years ago or whatever. There's always been little pockets of excellence, little pockets of, what should we say, little pockets of illumination, little pockets of people who understand the bigger picture. They're aware of the bigger picture and they understand it. Little pockets of enlightenment. And we've had these almost in every culture. There are people who for some reason get it. And they will tell other people who tell other people. But the problem is that though we've had these little bubbles of enlightenment bubble up sort of like a pot that's boiling, right? And a bubble comes up here and a bubble comes up there and so on, and it just continues to bubble, but it doesn't seem to build any particulars. It doesn't build one great big bubble, that is going to come up off the boiling water. It's all these little individual bubbles. And that's because they've all been local. Okay, you had a bubble that was, Buddha, right? It was a bubble, and he understood enlightenment and he understood the nature of reality, and he taught people who taught people, and it grows out and it gets bigger and bigger, and the wider it spreads, the further away it gets from the fundamental truths that the leader created in the first place. Then you get 50 different flavors of Buddhism, and they don't sometimes like each other, and they think the other ones are just not doing it right, and that sort of thing. So it kind of gets away from the point, the further it spreads out. So it dilutes itself as it spreads. It stays kind of strong in the center for a while, but then that eventually kind of gets old as well, because once you've gone through many generations of teachers teaching teachers, it's like the people who whisper a phrase and it goes around a circle, and by the time it gets back, it's been changed because people interpret it differently. Well, it's like that too. When you go through 100 generations of a philosophy or something, by the time you're 100 generations into the future, it doesn't sound exactly like it did in the beginning. So we've had all these little bubbles. In our country, in the U.S., Martin Luther King was a bubble, where you had all of this race problem, and the whites and the blacks were fearing each other, and there was this kind of standoff, and you could read between the lines, race wars coming and all of that. And then we had this guy who stand up and said, it's not about black against white or white against black. We're all humans together. We need to respect each other and get along. And when he said that, the strangest thing happened. A majority of the whites and a majority of the blacks agreed with him and said, yes, that's the solution. But until he got up and said it, that wasn't really foremost in their minds. So he kind of galvanized things and was a solution. Well, that was a little bubble of this positiveness that I'm talking about, this bubble of enlightenment. Somebody sees things in the right way, and it helps a lot of other people see things in the right way. But the bubbles have never been connected. And the reason that they've never been connected is twofold. One, they're all local. Okay, so we have this little bubble of racism here, but there's racisms a lot of other places that racism's practiced in a lot of places. It's still practiced here, but it didn't like spread out and make everybody aware how racism is a really unproductive, bad thing. It didn't do that. It worked in a local audience. Well, it did. I mean, we've all heard of Gandhi, right? And the things that he did, and it has some effect in a broader place, but it doesn't spread out and change everybody's viewpoint. It becomes a local phenomenon. From the Christian's point of view, Buddha was somebody that just really didn't understand. From a Buddhist point of view, the Christian viewpoint is one that the Christians really don't understand. They see it differently, yet there's truths in both, you see. But what happens is the differences overwhelm the truths. And they're local, which means they're not here, they're over there. And of course, people over there are always more wrong and more screwed up than the people who are here, where we are. So it's that kind of thing that's always kept it separate. The communications have not been very good. You haven't had a lot of connection. We fixed that now. For the first time in the history of humanity, we have an internet. And a large portion of the world is connected to it. Ideas can move and flow, and it's not like we here in America can hear stories about how Mahatma Gandhi is organizing the Indians to send the British home. But it's just an intellectual thing for us. We're not a part of it because we just, whatever. But the internet's different. The internet is more personal. It's not just a news story in a magazine. It's more personal because people talk to people and interchange, and there's discussions and things are going on with people from all over the planet. It's a different kind of an animal. So now we've got a communication system that allows us to all talk personally, kind of face to face, if you will, or keyboard to keyboard with each other, which means ideas and concepts can spread much more quickly. They're not stuck in a local area. Buddhism probably stayed in central India for, 3,000 years, or 1,000 years, or hundreds of years before it moved anyplace else. Well, eventually it spread over most of Asia, but still, these things are so slow, you see. So now we have a communication system by which we can quickly share ideas and concepts with, hundreds of thousands of other people. That's something that's never been around before, and in a personal way. We can do that. It's not just reading it in your newspaper or on a TV program, but you actually can be interactive with it, with other individuals who are experiencing it with you. And that's new. Now the thing that's missing, the second thing that we have, the thing that is missing in that picture, is that we still have, all the local things seen from their own perspective, and their perspective clashes with the perspective someplace else. So that's the problem. How do we all get together? Because this person, has this little bubble of intuition and enlightenment that he sees, but he sees it from this angle. And this other person sees something different and from a different angle. And the two of them think each other's wrong. You have the theists and you have the atheists. Well, what could be more opposite than that, you see? One's they're both believers, but one believes this and the other believes the opposite. How can you ever get people who believe the opposite together? Well, the missing link, I believe, is a single overarching understanding of the nature of reality in which everybody has a place. It's totally inclusive and not exclusive. There's not a single one of those little bubbles that can't plug in to this larger concept, because the concept isn't born of a particular experience, but it's the whole thing. It's not the Indian experience or the American experience or the the national or the social or the rich or the poor. It doesn't come out of any of that. It's just an overarching experience. So you have something like my big toe, you have the larger consciousness system, and the atheists can be very happy with that. They say, well, we told you there's no God, there's a larger consciousness system. You see, in this larger consciousness system, it's just a natural system, and it evolved and did whatever. You see, we were right. And the theists can say, look, we have a larger consciousness system. That's God. It has all the attributes that we've been saying for thousands of years, that God possesses. All right, we're missing the dogma and the details, but all the fundamental things there that make, our theism significant are there. So the two opposites can both plug in. They both can see that they were right from their own perspective, and there's no problem. And it's the same with, the Christians and the Buddhists, and with Rupert Sheldrake in England. And he has a part of the picture. And the things that he has said and whatever, a lot of people read that and understand that he's showing a bigger picture here. He's not stuck to the old kind of limited science. He's got a bigger picture.
I think he calls it morphic resonance.
Yeah, morphic resonance in the morphic field. Well, as it turns out, the morphic field is a metaphor. There's really not a physical morphic field, which maybe is what he intended, but that doesn't matter. All of the results, all of the things that morphic field supports are supported in this as a theory. So it doesn't matter that the details aren't there. Let the morphic field be a metaphor. The larger consciousness system, the big picture, supports the results that he derives from his field. And that's really what's important. It's not the structure that brings you to the result. It's having a logical, scientific foundation built under your result. That's what it does for the theists, the atheists, for the Rupert Sheldrake, for Bruce Lipton. And his view comes through biology and seeing how that cells, aren't at the mercy of a machine science. They change themselves. They grow. They're evolving. They have their own sense of intelligence and what they should be doing, and they work toward those ends. So he sees that, and whatever he describes that really isn't the important thing. It's that what his description describes is real and can be supported by this bigger thing. So that's the point. You take all the various views that all have their own enlightenment, pieces of the picture. They all see, they all have it's not just a big machine, it's more complex than that, and the consciousness researchers, from the Rhine Institute to the Pear Labs that are doing experiments with mind controlling the outcomes of random processes and so on. All of these fit into the same thing. So you have all these piece parts that have discovered something. Pear says, wow, we've discovered something really unique here. The mind can modify the outcomes of random distributions. Oh, we have a placebo effect. Guess what? What a doctor tells a patient has a lot to do with how the medicine works. Wow, cells aren't just machines, they're more than that. We have all these little pieces of enlightenment that have been bubbling up for thousands of years, but they've never been able to connect because we haven't had the communication infrastructure, and they've never had an overarching theory that every one of them can attach to. A general theory that builds a scientific, logical foundation underneath those discoveries that they can all plug into. Okay, so that is now just happening on this planet, you say, in humanity now. It's been a new thing. When we're talking about things that go on in cultures and planets, we're talking in terms of, hundreds, if not thousands of years, for things to happen. But in any case, the infrastructure, the concepts for this, I think I kind of feel it in the air. It's really the big changes are coming. The infrastructure for those big changes, for those big shifts in consciousness and awareness, have just been put into place, just recently, just now, just in the last decade, just in the last few years, and they're spreading. The social networks are spreading. The internet is spreading in the sense that it's the number of people connected to it is spreading. Computers are getting cheaper. Internet devices that aren't really full computers, the poor can afford these things now. So it's spreading in that sense. The concept of the my big toe, that there's one scientific explanation that everybody can connect to and be right. It's not like, you're wrong. Basically, everybody can connect to it and find a logical foundation underneath their little bubble of enlightenment. And it pulls it all together in one thing. So this is a brand new state, a brand new set of conditions for humanity at this point. You've got the communication set, and you've got a set of ideas that is totally inclusive and not exclusive to anyone.
It's interesting.
So we're priming, the pump's been primed, the infrastructure's been laid, the concepts required have bubbled up, and yes, that has a very, now whether that all comes together and of course, does what we hope it will do in the next decade or not, who knows, but at least it's there. Before, you didn't have the communication, so all of these little bubbles stayed local, spread very slowly, and by the time they spread, they ended up getting more and more diluted. So by the time they spread far enough to include kind of a lot of people, they were so diluted that they didn't really make a whole lot of sense anymore. People were just mouthing things that they had memorized rather than really understanding what was going on, and that always happens. So because they're local, their expansion is always a weak, diluted expansion in time. It never really can capture the whole thing. So they've never, no concepts or ideas have ever really become inclusive. It's always been my idea versus your idea, and now we've got the glue that'll glue them all together. I think that we've got what we need to go forward in a way that has not been available to the human race ever before.
I think it's fascinating that you mentioned this communication infrastructure, the social networks, and these things in place that allow this to be, us to communicate better. It mirrors the way the larger reality works, in that we are all connected. We don't need the internet, we don't need the social networks, but it is similar in that we are connected at another level, the same way.
Yes, that's the fractal process. You see, in a fractal, you repeat. You have simple processes that you repeat. Well, this communication, we're all netted, whatever. Well, here we are, we repeat that process. Here we are all netted with computers, you see, in this physical reality. We're just mimicking the process itself. So it just gets repeated at another level. So yes, that's true. It's the way the system works. That's why it evolves that way. It's the way the system works. So in that sense, digital computing was inevitable. It just had to take a long enough time to where we could replicate the same processes driving consciousness in the first place. So we weren't capable of doing that. So we do replicate these processes, but sometimes the timeline is very long. But that's because that's what reality is made of. So that's what we end up with. But that's true. It is interesting that how things work that way. But you can see the fractal sense of reality, that what we do and how we are is just patterns of what's generating, patterns of what we're made of. We keep generating those same patterns.
So everyone has a piece of the puzzle, and they're all right, except for the dogma and the differences.
Yeah, differences in their metaphors, difference in the way they describe it. Because people will come up with something and they will, let's say they come up with something and they find out that intent changes future reality, right? That's one of the things we talked about. Your intent will change future probability of what happens. Well, they get together in this one group and they call that prayer. Well, that's what it is. There's this another group that's more secular and they call that the power of positive thinking. Well, you see, some other group gets into that and they call that the secret, how to program the universe, you see. So you have all these various groups and they're all very different and they all use different words and different metaphors and so on, but they're all fundamentally, you see, plugged into the same thing. So now they still may fight because they want to keep their metaphor. My metaphor is better than your metaphor. But once they see that things like the morphic field is a metaphor, where it leads is real. The things that he describes with that morphic field, real. And he just made the morphic field up to suit his data, you see. And that's what we always do in science. He has data. He knows that these things happen. He knows that the science we have can't explain it, that it's something else other than the science we have. So he says, well, what could it be? How is it that we're all connected? How is it that we share this information paranormally, not in writing, not in words, not in gestures? How do we share it some other way that is not normal to our science? And he goes, well, it could be there's this field, and we're all sharing things in this field. Well, of course, that's true. The field is consciousness. That's the field. Well, in his metaphor, he doesn't call it consciousness. He says, oh, it's the morphic field. Okay, it's a metaphor. That's another term, another word. But he's talking about consciousness and, things that are netted within consciousness and the way we modify and change things with intent. And it's all the same kind of thing. So unless you get hung up over the particular words, it's prayer. No, it isn't. It's positive thinking. No, it isn't. It's the secret. If you get hung up over words, then there's still a problem. But I think we have the opportunity now to see a bigger picture. And we can look at all of that and we can say, oh, that's all the same thing. The same attributes are explaining the paralabs, mind affecting matter. It's intent, modifies future probability. The prayer, the positive thinking, all of those are just intent modifying. So now you get a general principle and you can explain those, plus you explain the paralabs results, plus you explain the guy freezing ice cube, Dr. Emoto, his results, plus you explain things like the placebo effect, and on and on and on again. Everything starts, all the pieces start dropping into a hole. And then you see that the morphic field is really does a whole lot.
So everyone with that piece of puzzle in their hand needs to place it up on the board to see the bigger picture and how
you need to connect it, because if we have 1,000 different pieces and none of the pieces know how they fit together with each other, then we're never going to get very far. We're always fragmented and we're always fighting with each other. But once everybody takes their piece and say, look, my piece plugs in here, my piece plugs in there, and by the time they've plugged them all in, say, look, we've got this one understanding, this one scientific set of principles and ideas, and it explains everything. And we're all connected to it. And guess what? We're all right. We all got a piece of the puzzle. Dogs do know when their master is coming home, Yes. And why? Because they're conscious. And we're conscious. There's consciousness. We communicate. All consciousness, talks to each other. It's all netted. And intent sends messages with the intent of, I'm coming home. I'm going to see my family and my dog and whatever else. That intention is a signal. It's a message that gets sent out. So, yes, those things do work. And it's not important that you call it a morphic field or you call it, the secret, or you call it some other kind of name, the naming of things, the naming of your metaphors is kind of not really relevant. That's just an explanation of how you explain this piece. But that's kind of a local explanation for that piece. When you find an explanation that explains all the pieces, now I think it would be easy to let go and say, oh, I see. Morphic field? Consciousness. Yeah. The consciousness field. Okay. It's the same field that affects those random number generators and the way that comes out, and that affects the ice cubes. And all the rest of it makes sense then. We know there are people who can heal with their intent. We've seen that. It's been documented thousands of times. The only people who question it are the people who don't understand. It's the people who are ignorant of the information. They've never actually been there. They've never actually seen it. It's never actually happened to them. Those are the people who say, oh no, that never happens. The people who have been there and seen it happen to them are not fools who were easily tricked. They know what they know. So those things do happen, and that too can be plugged in. All of this can be plugged in, plus things like the double slit experiment. Plug it in, you got an explanation, The expanding universe, plug it in, you got an explanation. So you have all the science, all the physics, all the theology, and with theology, I'd probably include the atheists with that. That's just kind of a different sort of, that's an anti-theology, I guess you'd say. All of these things have their own viewpoint. It's like the seven people in feeling the elephant, right? Here's the tail's the rope, the legs the pillar, the trunk's the this or that, the ears, all the pieces. They all have their own description of an elephant, but when they see a bigger picture, they're all right. It is a rope, a tree, a pillar, a rope. It is all those things. A wall. Yeah, they're all right. They just need to realize that we can stop calling it a rope now. We can call it an elephant, and it's got a rope-like part.
We talked in one of our interviews, I think it was Shedding Light on the Speed of Light, we talked about cooperation and the next level that this earthly existence can come up to. You're talking about this here in that people need to let go of that piece of the puzzle they're hanging on to in order to cooperate and connect and become something more than what we have now.
Exactly. That's, if we look at the fractal nature of our reality, we see that if we start at the beginning, at the small stuff, what are they doing? We see the process that's been gone through at the simple levels, and we see that same process is ongoing at our level. So we look at the cells and we see how the cells have had to learn to cooperate. The individual little one-celled critters needed to cooperate to create a multi-celled critter. They needed to get into a cooperative effort, and they build something that's better. And no, they're not all chained into a they have no freedom now because now they're all part of this larger organism, and they no longer have the freedom to do what they used to be able to do. Not so. They have more freedom. They can do so much more. Before they only had, say, 2 or 3 degrees of freedom in the things that they could do. Now they've got 10. They've got so much more. So it's not that as soon as you join something larger, you lose freedom and lose individuality. You gain freedom and individuality because you create something that exists in a whole different dimension of interaction. You've added a whole lot more than you've taken away. You haven't really taken away anything. What you've done is you've given up fear and become cooperative, which is love. Okay, now maybe the word love doesn't apply as well as the word cooperation, but it's the same idea. It's a cooperative thing where you're doing things for the result of the whole and not just for the result of your own. And that does not end you up in a place of less freedom. That ends you up in a place of greater freedom. greater opportunity, a bigger reality, a bigger decision space, more decisions, more choices than you had before. A lot more choices. And it is the way things have always worked. So when the little one-celled things grew up enough that they could cooperate, they started dividing. And, you had just little one-celled things, and they divided, and you had more little one-celled things. But eventually you had some two-celled things, and they were survivable and better, more survivable. And then the more complex things were more survivable. What are you doing when you make things more complex? You're decreasing the entropy. More order, more complexity. It's evolving. We evolved to more complex configurations that are more functional. Well, that's what we see. We see these things, and now they're multi-celled things. And now these multi-celled things have specialization. The walking part, the eating part, the locomotion part. So you have all these different cells. Now you have a bigger thing, and it's even more survivable. It's a lower entropy. It's more complex, more sharing, more cooperation, and so on it goes. And once you get to a step where everything at this level has learned to cooperate, you get a new thing at a bigger level. So everything at the level of, I don't know what, a jellyfish, all the cells in the jellyfish learn to cooperate, you get a new thing called a jellyfish. It's a new being that has so much more potential and ability than did all the separate cells. See?
I think this is an interesting point, because I think the people who have their own theories, who have done their own research for decades, who are part of these local bubbles of enlightenment, they're all hanging on to their own thing for fear, perhaps, of joining together. They can't see the bigger picture because they're remaining within their own little worlds. So you're saying cooperate, place it in this larger framework, which is something like your My Big Toe, and see the bigger picture that way. If that happened, you would have the shift, the major shift.
That's true. And it's a matter, until they are ready to do that, until all of the, let's say the human thing, now all the individual humans you can see as a cell in this greater thing. They're a part of it. All right, now humans in a cell, we're not going to glom together, and stick to each other's shoulders, and it's not like that. That's not how we're going to operate. We're a different kind of thing. We're not a skin cell or something. We're not going to glom to each other and, so we can all hold hands and, that's not the way we cooperate. We cooperate in a higher level way than that. But we, as a race, once we learn, or at least subsets of us learn to cooperate, we'll build a structure, a cooperative structure that's more functional, more survivable, gives us more freedom, more choices than what we had before as little individuals, running over the surface of the earth with our spear and our slingshot trying to, fight each other. We'll find something that's greater. And then there'll be some of those little bubbles, and there'll be bunches of those, and one day they'll learn to cooperate with each other and form bigger units. You see, it's a fractal process. It's called evolution. That's how things evolve. They lower entropy as they evolve. They become more complex, more functional things as they evolve to higher states. Well, that drops us in this position of saying, well, here we are. We're humanity. We see our future. Our future is that we need to cooperate. We need to form larger, more complex things where we are all cooperating in. And it will be it'll be a better life, a better existence, more exciting, more challenging, more freedom, more decisions, more choices than we ever had before. We'll go places and do things and become parts of things that otherwise we couldn't even imagine before. And then there'll be other groups, and maybe we will group around geography. Maybe our planet will become one such group. The whole planet. You see, maybe we'll finally get back to Gaia, one planet, one organism, all working together in cooperative. Okay, and then what would we do then? Well, then there may be other planets, other places. And now those have to grow up to the point that they can come together and form one larger thing. What's that? The Federation of the Galaxy, right? Or whatever. Who knows? And then there's many galaxies that all have to learn to grow up, to cooperate, to form something even bigger. You see, it's the fractal process. That's the nature of evolution. It lowers entropy by evolving to more complex, more functional states. It's the way it works. So here we are, and we're all running around, and rugged individualists going to fight each other to the death, and so we can get what we can get and keep it. And that's counterproductive to where we're going. That's counterproductive to going to where our evolution is pushing us. And it's not that, well, how do you know what we're going to evolve to? I'm not talking about individuals, whether we'll have big heads and little arms or what. I'm talking about us as individuated units of consciousness playing in a VR, and the VR is still evolving, and we need to learn to cooperate. Where we connect isn't physically, like cells, connecting to each other to make a bigger thing. We connect with our intents, our minds, our consciousnesses. We're all netted, you see. So no, we're not going to be a group mind like an insect. We're all also individuals. You need individuals to cooperate. You have individual cells. Your cells aren't all group mind. They all have functions to do, jobs to do, like Bruce says. They all have their jobs, their functions, and by being part of something bigger, they have more decisions and more, I don't know, it's, I keep saying the same words, but you're part of just something larger. And the part doesn't get lost in the whole. People worry about that. Well, if I'm a part of something larger, then I become insignificant. The larger thing is significant, and I want to be significant. Matter of fact, I want to be the most significant thing. I want to rule the world, right? And you get into that stuff. If you rule the world, you're the most significant. So people want to look out for number one and make sure they're significant, more significant than the guy next door, because that's how you define success. You become more significant than other people. So as long as you have this competitive concept of existence as a fight, then that stymies our evolution, which we will eventually become. We will do that. We will learn to cooperate one day, but we're just like all those little mean-spirited bacteria that were all milling around for millions of years before they learned to connect and build something bigger, build something more complex, lower their entropy, and evolve. And we'll do the same way. We may wander around as little individuals who are trying to look out after number one and really don't give a damn about anybody else. We're just protecting ours, maybe our friends, our loved ones, and nobody else counts. We will do that and do that and do that until eventually we outgrow it. But now what we were talking about is now we have the infrastructure. We've got the communications, and we've got the model, the way of looking at it. And it doesn't have to be my big toe. My big toe is just maybe an initial offering to that model. Just an initial way of looking at it. It's not like, oh, this is the model and this will be the answer for all. It's not the point. The point is it's a thought, it's a concept that kind of starts off in that direction, something that people can plug into. It will no doubt be improved and added to and subtracted from and built by lots of other people, not by me, but by lots of other people over a long time. It's not that this is the answer, it's that this is a beginning toward the answer that people can plug into. So that's kind of where we're going. That's sort of our destiny as an individual species, and it's no different than the destiny of those bacteria running around in the primal sea, right? The primordial ooze. We talk about it, metaphor, the primordial ooze that was there. It's full of little one-celled things that eventually figured out how to cooperate and turn into bigger things. And it's not like a whole bunch of bacteria got together, had a meeting, shook hands, and then stuck their shoulders together and to make something else. It doesn't work like that. That's my metaphors. That's the way we're just talking, because it's a simple way to explain things. We're talking about evolution. Things work together, they succeed, so they persist. They don't work together, they don't succeed, they disappear. That's how evolution works. Eventually, we will find out that success, what succeeds and makes us healthier, happier, more productive, more fulfilled, gives us more freedom and more opportunity and more choices, is cooperation. That's the way it always is. See, that's the way the system works. That's the way consciousness is. That's the blueprint, and we are just a fractal process repeating that blueprint, and that's what we need to do. Now, how long will it take us to do it? We've been struggling for 2 million years. I don't know about humans. 2 million years. Maybe humans have been around 2 million years, something like that. But bipeds have been around probably longer than that. But anyway, we have, the bipeds were part of that evolution, right? Before you got to the species, human. Neanderthals were part of that process, even though they were a part that didn't succeed. They went away. But this process has been going on for a long time, and we eventually will find that the evolution isn't talking really about, our evolution isn't really talking about the evolution of our bodies, whether we need big heads to get our big brains and our little bodies shrivel up because we don't need to be physical anymore, because everything is, mental or something. That's not the point. We evolve by how we interact to each other, how we interact with each other, and the structures that we can form through our cooperation. That's where the evolution is going, not through the physical. Well, the physical evolution will still take place as well, but that's not the point. That's not really our mission. Our bodies will evolve however they evolve to suit the conditions that will be here in 100,000 years from now. That's how evolution works. But our evolution, in the sense of being part of a consciousness system, is to evolve to becoming love, cooperation, working together, building structures that are lower entropy, that give everybody something more. It's a win-win for everybody. It's not that the boss of the structure is the warlord and owns everything. There is no boss to the structure, just like nobody owns the internet. You see, the internet's a very cooperative venture. The social media are very cooperative adventures. People cooperate in interacting. They put up material that other people want to look at, want to share. All sorts of things. It's just a cooperative intervention. There's nobody sitting around who's the master of the internet. Well, you can put up that, and you need to go get that and put that up, and or if there was, the internet wouldn't be worth a damn. It wouldn't have generated, what it's generated. The reason it works so well is that nobody is in charge. It's just a cooperative, self-organizing entity that has evolved, you see? And that's part, like you say, it's part of the pattern. That's the way consciousness is. That's the way the whole thing works. So we're part of that larger pattern, and we need to eventually grow up, evolve enough that we, as a race, can join with all the other consciousness on this planet and become a bigger thing, which I think some people call Gaia, right? Which is the Earth and its environment all cooperating together, not portions of it trying to rip off the other portions so that they can get more of what they want, at the expense of something else. It's that we're part of the ecosystem as human beings, and we all kind of interact and cooperatively, work together. Well, we're just not there yet. We got a long way to evolve before we get there, but we finally got the pieces in place to enable us to do that. Otherwise, we're just these little bubbles of enlightenment that go up and everybody says, oh yeah, look, there's the answer. And okay, maybe a few hundred people or maybe even a few thousand people get it. and then it spreads out, it dilutes, it becomes sort of little to nothing, and then it's this group against that group. And so that's what we've been doing now for 100,000 years. And we finally got into writing, 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, where they were actually making records and things. And we have, Krishna and others who kind of little bubbles of enlightenment. And they've been going on all over ever since. You have Jesus, you have Muhammad, you have all these people who are little bubbles of enlightenment. And so far, nothing's ever pulled them together because we didn't have the infrastructure. They're too far apart. It takes too long.
So we have the infrastructure, we have all the pieces in place, and we just need the cooperation.
Now we just need to grow up. But we have the things that allow us to do that instead of fighting with each other over, it's consciousness. No, it's a morphic field. No, it's consciousness. You're wrong. No, you're wrong. You see, if we get into that, then we're not grown up enough to take the next step. But if we see something that says, this is inclusive of all of us, we can all plug into this and see a bigger picture. Now that's a giant step for us to be able to do that. And as I've said before, I think science will probably lead that march when they finally, the majority of the physicists say, this is really a virtual reality. That best describes the data we've got. And then the next step is, a virtual reality can't create itself. That doesn't work. It just doesn't spontaneously pop out of nothing. It can't create itself. And then it's like, well, then who created it? Other. Who the heck is other, and where do they come from, and where do they live? And then other is just consciousness. Consciousness is the computer, you see? And then, click, 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 all the pieces fall together and it all makes sense. And okay, I get it. Now, everything from A to Z, all the little pieces now make sense. So we've got those three major paradigms that we have to get over. This is a virtual reality. Well, where did it come from? It comes from other. What in the heck's other? Where's that? And then, that's consciousness. And consciousness is an information system. So all of that pulls together. And then I think we have the potential, once those three things, once those three paradigms fall over, then we've got the ability to start to connect and see that we're all part of a bigger picture. Once we see that we all can plug into this thing and we're all right and it's all inclusive, then the ability to cooperate at that point is going to take a giant leap forward, you see, because now we're all plugged in. We're not fighting with each other anymore. Hey, my larger conscious system is your God. Okay, atheists and theists, you've really been talking about the same thing all these years, You thought you were talking about opposite sides, opposite beliefs, and really it all kind of integrates into one thing. Same with the philosophers, all the various philosophers, particularly the ones came out of Germany in like the 1700s, 1800s with monads, and it all fits. So that's why the last piece of the puzzle is this thing that everybody can plug their own idea into and be part of a bigger picture, because that's the thing then that will enable cooperation. Oh, I see, we're all part of this big picture. We're all right, we're all included. Well, let's cooperate. Let's see how we can modify this whole big thing so it's even better. Then it won't be my big toe, it'll be somebody else's big toe. It'll be the world's big toe. It'll be something else. It'll grow and become whatever it needs to become. But that's the thing then that will enable the cooperation, which then enables the evolution that enables us to continue the fractal of consciousness and grow up, you see. So it all kind of fits together, and that's where, that's kind of the bigger picture of, boy, we're out of time. I got this feeling that something really exciting is happening here, you see. Well, it is, and that doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow or even in the next decade or in the next 2 decades. but we finally rounded we've had this long learning curve, very long learning curve, and we finally kind of rounded the edge to where we've got all the infrastructure and the concepts in place that we can begin to develop answers and solutions that are inclusive, which means then we can begin to cooperate, which then means we are starting on our evolution. We're actually starting the next step of our evolution, which is to become something more. And on this planet anyway, we can kind of become one world family, right? The name of the workshop, I wasn't workshop, but seminar, whatever, that I was in Germany. It's called One World Family.
You were recognized for your contribution with your My Big Toe.
Right.
It's very exciting to think that everything is in place for this to happen. So I thank you very much again. Thanks.